This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
I'm half tempted to title this one The Midsummer Nightmare. Because we're, about halfway through July at this point. I know summer doesn't technically start until late June and rolls around through September, but I always base it on when school lets out. It's also the Midsummer Nightmare with everything that's happening in modern wrestling. It's times like this where I'm actually thankful that AEW Collision is a thing. Regardless of what you think about that show, and trust me, it has its flaws. But then I turn around and watch a program like Dynamite every week, and I'm like, you want to talk about the show with flaws? Up and down that show, it's a walking red flag of flaws. I was actually able to get through this one without falling asleep, which was mildly good news, I guess. Last week, I don't even know what happened. I just got so burnt out by the time I got home. When I turned on that show and saw all the copious amounts of horror in front of me, I was like, maybe I'll just wait till tomorrow to finish this, because what's that popular thing everyone says nowadays? I can't. I think that's my general take on AEW Dynamite. When people ask me, what do you really think about that show? I just say, I can't. I even had this little CBD mist machine running in the background. Bought it a while ago. I forget what the thing's called. It's supposed to de-stress you with different aromas. De-stress. As opposed to distress, which is what AEW Dynamite does to me. Well, I guess I can start with the good news. Normally, I'm not one to enjoy being wrong, but in this case, I'm actually kind of glad I was. I thought that Blood and Guts was booked for this week's show. Turns out it's actually happening next week. I mean, don't get me wrong, either way it sucks, because we're going to wind up having to review it anyway. So now I have another 7 days of dread to look forward to. Especially by the time we found out who the final partners were for both teams. But to tell you the truth, that was far from the worst thing about this show. Well, I mean, the worst thing about this show is Tony's booking. That's been the chronic issue with this program since company inception. The fact that Tony's booking sucks and he has no clue what he's doing. Like, I even remember when they ran down the card for this thing on the Collision show, and I just groaned with, like, each passing match they announced. I remember it actually got progressively worse as the card went, which kind of made it more hilarious. By the time they got to the Chris Jericho match, I was ready to jump out an 8-story window. Speaking of the gray handsome devil, why don't we just go ahead and delve right into Jericho's calamitous segment this week? Of all the fucking guys on this roster, of all the collective waste of indie dreck that Tony's got locked under contract right now, for Christ knows what reason, he woke up one day, probably coked out of his mind, and he said to himself, you know what would be a great idea for a match? Let's do Chris Jericho versus Commander. Commander, by the way, for those that forgot, spelled Komander. Commander. Because that's apparently a Gen Z thing where they just intentionally misspell everything and make up a bunch of slang words that rational-minded people don't have time to partake in. Because everything is stupid and the future generation of this world is going to fuck us over. Yes, I'm not kidding you. This was not a rib. They actually booked this match to happen on live broadcast cable television. In prime time. This is like straight out of the Nitro playbook. Let's just pick two random guys out of a hat and have them wrestle for 15 minutes. Regardless of whether or not it's a complete styles clash, or the simple fact that one of the guys in the match is the steaming shits and everybody knows it. Now, okay, here's the thing. For those of you that have never seen Commander wrestle on this show, allow for me to just give you a general rundown of his credentials. Air quotes around that, by the way. He's every generic indie guy under a mask you've ever seen in the last 5 to 10 years. He knows how to do every cartwheel and backflip and tumbling routine ever concocted by the circus professionals. Meanwhile, the fucker doesn't know a wrist lock from a wrist watch. I also like the idea that he's supposed to be some kind of masked luchador in kayfabe. So, of course, his entrance music is every bad generic hip-hop tune that AEW uses for like 90% of their roster. I mean, let's be blunt. Judas fucking sucks. But at least you know what guy the music is linked to. If you played this hideously awful hip-hop music to me without any context, never in a million years would I ever be able to guess, oh, that's Commander's music. Nor would anyone care, but that's another matter entirely. So anyway, they had this match because, I don't know, Tony's an idiot, for one. And I guess Jericho thought it would have been a good idea. Because, you know, Jericho is all about getting over that young blood, right? He did wonders for Action Audrey, didn't he? What's that guy up to these days? Aside from doing 3-minute jobs to Scorpio Sky on Collision. The match, as I expected, was mostly horrible. Commander did all of his choreographed Cirque du Soleil bullshit, most of which looked athletically impressive, but had no semblance of wrestling attached to it. His punches looked like shit, his strikes were awful. The guy looks about as visibly threatening as a strawberry shortcake cartoon character. Of course, he has every bad habit that most indie guys carry, aside from the offensively bad punches, strikes, and kicks. He also does the thing where he turns his back to his opponent before taking off to hit the ropes, and Jericho has to just kneel there and pretend like he can't just reach out and club this fucking moron in the back of the head. So it buries both guys. The Lucha Jagoff doesn't sell a fucking thing for the entire match. Just springs back to his feet within seconds of Jericho missing a move or countering something, and then goes right back to doing his outlaw flippy-dippy shite. Of course, I can't omit the obvious flaw, where it takes him almost an entire minute to set up half this convoluted shit. And after these guys embarrass themselves, in the wrestling business for that matter, for about 15 minutes, Jericho hit a botched codebreaker from out of the corner while Commander was trying one of his twisty, frilly, willy-nilly dives. And they tried to set up another ridiculously fake-looking bouncy rope spot. I have no idea what they were going for. And then finally, Jericho put him away with the Lion Tamer. My notes conclude with the following. This sucked. Commander sucks. And moreover, why is it taking Chris Jericho well over 10 minutes to beat a nothing-happening fake lucha jobber? This would be like if Roman Reigns was having a back and forth competitive match on SmackDown with one of the fucking LWO flunkies. It's ridiculous. Meanwhile, everybody that's already absorbed into the AEW bubble will call this a great match because Commander did a bunch of cool flips. Because wrestling fans are retarded and have no idea what actual legit pro wrestling is supposed to be. Nor will they ever understand it. So after that complete monstrosity, out comes Don Callis. Because what we really needed at this point, after that rotten opening match where Jericho was getting beaten up by a job guy for almost 15 minutes, was Don Callis coming out to lighten up the mood. To reassure that Chris Jericho is one of the greatest of all time. Meanwhile, he can't beat a fucking job guy in under 3 minutes. It's ridiculous. And he's out there trying to recruit Jericho into this non-existent faction that apparently just comprises of himself and Take a Shit at the moment. And his way of trying to get on Chris's good side and kiss ass is to show him some compiled footage of when Callis and Jericho were managed/mentored by the late great Bad News Allen, better known to some as Bad News Brown if you were watching the WWF in the late 80s. Something that I guarantee not even the majority of AEW marks had much knowledge of. Unless I guess you were watching indie wrestling footage in Canada from like the 90s. And in that case, sure. I guess this was sentimental somehow. I just laughed when I saw Don Callis with a full head of hair. And then I'm looking at him standing next to Jericho in the ring. Looking shinier than a fucking cue ball. I mean, even Jericho was poking fun at that. But, yeah, I pretty much got nothing out of it. I don't care about Jericho and Callis in a faction. I don't care about them reuniting their friendship. I would like for Chris Jericho to go away, get the fuck off my TV, retire, basically withdraw from any on-screen appearances since he kills everything he's involved with. But I guess for now, we have this to look forward to. Whatever this is. If I had to venture a guess, I would probably say nothing good. Well, I'll say this. I don't think Callis and Jericho are going to have as much chemistry as apparently MJF and Adam Cole seem to have found with whatever this bromance/bro session thing is we're seeing right now. It's, well, like I said, from the moment they started this blind eliminator tag tournament, if you remove all logic from the equation and you go in understanding that none of it makes a lick of fucking sense, yeah, they're probably the most entertaining thing on the show right now. The pre-tapes they're shooting right now, even though they have WWE scripted entertainment written all over them, they're funny by their own right. It's a complete farce to think that there's just a random cameraman that AEW's paying to follow Adam Cole and MJF around to watch them hang out. Unless we're led to believe it's Tony, which in that case might not be as shocking. But, well, we confirmed a few things here. Adam Cole is head over heels for Britt Baker, to the point where he is willing to give up the Ric Flair Space Mountain ride to hook up with a few whores for a one-night stand. And Cole also convinced MJF that video games are cool, but only when you have friends to play with. MJF, man, tugging at the heartstrings. When Cole's telling him, what, you never played multiplayer games before? And MJF very solemnly goes, well, you need friends for that. Dang. I almost felt bad for the poor fucker, you know? Because MJF's not a bad guy. He's just misunderstood. He's a prick, sure, but all he's ever wanted is someone to hang out and relate to share a common bond with occasionally. It just sucks that we all know how this is going to pan out in the end, and we're going to be left disappointed. Although I did appreciate the little Easter egg they threw in here. While MJF and Cole are playing AEW's really terrible looking video game that finally dropped after like 17 years of stalling, they were wrestling FTR. So, there's your evident title feud later on, I guess. Now, I said last time, I like the idea of that match. I just wish it would have happened more organically instead of with this totally contrived BS they're doing right now with Cole and MJF acting like friends. Like, even the announcers are openly burying this storyline on commentary, talking about how much of a bumfuck Adam Cole is for trusting Max. So it turns out by the end, he's going to end up looking like the world's dumbest babyface. Which is what we all like seeing. Stupid protagonists that we're supposed to cheer and root for. Yeah, that story always gets over. Kind of like the company mascot, right? And on the subject of this blind eliminator tag tournament, where teams are just sort of appearing from out of the woodwork with no explanation. Seriously, how many fucking teams are in this thing? Seems like 50. Have they ever even shown brackets for this thing? I don't know. Well, here, we had freshly shriveled Limp Dick Cassidy and Darby Allin versus Sammy Guevara and Danny Garcia. Guevara and Garcia, I have no idea where that team came from. Guess I wasn't watching enough Rampage footage in my free time. Oops, my bad. Of course, I have no idea who the hell I'm supposed to cheer for in this thing. Guevara and Garcia were sometimes working heel, unless Guevara was in there with Darby, and in that case, he was a babyface because those guys are apparently friends off camera. I don't know what's going on. I mean, Darby and Limp Dick were face, but they're both unlikable personalities by every definition in my book, so I don't like them. And Daniel Garcia doesn't even have a personality, so I'm kind of ambivalent about him. Anyway, the match was mostly there. They did a lot of spots, many of which looked sloppy. It also went for a fucking eternity. Why this match also needed to exceed going 10 minutes is beyond me. Garcia and Denim Dickless traded a bunch of hokey-looking pinfall attempts at one point. That looked beyond fake. Guevara at one point missed a shooting star out of the corner where he nearly came down and landed right on his neck. Would have paralyzed himself if he had to rotate another inch or two. And that was a setup so Prince Nana could come down with a skateboard and hand it to Garcia on the floor. I guess so he could use it on Darby. Why? I don't know. Just roll with the punches. None of it makes any fucking sense. And what ends up happening is Darby tries to steal the skateboard from Garcia, but Paul Turner gets wrapped up in trying to pry it away. And while Turner is distracted with Garcia, Swerve Strickland randomly runs in from literally out of nowhere and catches Darby with a running knee. He may as well have swooped in from the rafters. That's how quickly he came and went. And he and Nana powdered over the guardrail so Guevara could hit Darby with a GTH and pin him. Because apparently the running knee from Swerve wasn't enough. No, of course, Sammy had to actually hit his finish. Because agents. Simply put, they don't have any. So no one knows how to lay out a match in this company. Anyway, well, we had a couple small things between that and the next match, but I'll talk about the Nick Wayne thing later. We had some more hideously bad acting in the back with Adam Cole, Roderick Strong, and Renee Paquette. Right before Cole's about to head out for the next match, MJF's trying to feign being sick and bombarding him with a bunch of texts. Cole's I mean, it's probably easy enough to say overacting, but that's basically what it was. He was doing a very over-exaggerated performance of all of this. It was totally apparent. And mind you, all this drama to build up to an MJF Adam Cole versus Big Bill Brian Cage match. I almost want to start calling him Just a Bill instead, so I can find an excuse to play some Schoolhouse Rock clips. I mean, he is just a very ordinary looking Bill, who so happens to be 7 foot tall. Brian Cage actually looks more physically impressive, even though he's a lot shorter than Bill and couldn't wrestle his way out of a wet paper bag. Of course, it doesn't help when he's in there facing off with Cole, who also doesn't look like he could believably wrestle his way out of a wet paper bag. At least he finally wrestled with a t-shirt on, though. Maybe that's why MJF's been heckling him about the t-shirt thing. He secretly wanted Cole to cover up his upper body the entire time. It's genius. So if you watch my review of the Cole MJF match last week, you probably remember me saying that it was the worst MJF match I ever saw. Part of that had to do with the fact that it was mostly MJF in there assing off and trying to do a comedy match, which is not his wheelhouse. They were also wrestling Mini Dick Matt Menard and whoever his partner was, I don't even remember. Was it Butcher or The Blade? One of those two. Doesn't matter. Anyway, it sucked. So this time, they basically followed that same formula of doing a bunch of overly scripted out comedy spots to the point where I just kind of gave up trying to write anything down. Before the first commercial pitch, they basically went an entire 3 minutes with nobody actually doing any form of wrestling. We had MJF attempting a body slam on Bill and throwing out his back. We had MJF trying to powder only to get talked into coming back by Adam Cole. We had Cage and Cole doing a push-up contest. It is rather relieving to know that Adam Cole can at least do 10 push-ups. Can he do 3 sets of 10? Probably not. But at least he can do a push-up. And all that happened before the commercial. Literally just an endless sea of comedy spots. At one point I wrote down here, isn't it sad how we've stooped this low in AEW? To the point where we're even teasing the idea that Big Bill and Brian Cage could win a tournament to become #1 contenders for the tag straps? Probably made worse by the fact that MJF and Cole, the guys who will more than likely win this tournament in the end, are doing mostly comedy matches instead of trying to play it serious. But then again, Dynamite isn't really the wrestling program built on serious wrestling. They kind of excel in this lame-ass comedy muck. All the while, the regular wrestling here is just kind of a jumbled mess of chaos. It's nice to see Adam Cole's mentoring MJF in how to properly do the thigh slap super kick spot. Just to make sure we overly expose the hand making contact with the leg for good measure. Get that right in front of the camera for everybody to see. MJF, man, learning from the experts. Anytime Brian Cage was in there doing shit, especially with Cole, I was just clenching my butt cheeks the entire time. Just waiting for something horribly awry to happen. And with Cole's history of injuries, the last guy I needed to see him work in a match with is Brian the Botch Machine Cage. In any case, they did a bunch of stuff at the end. MJF hit a heat seeker on Cage through the ropes, and then Cole put him away with a boom. And then Roddy was looking on at the monitor all dejected. Oh no, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself there. That was after the promo that MJF and Cole did. Once again, MJF's trying to be a babyface. It just comes off so artificial. And I get that's the point. It still doesn't make it any less cringe. He's yucking it up to the fans, talking about how over he is, how over Adam Cole's shtick is. I think this was the first time where it hit me watching Cole Does anybody know why he always squats down like he's trying to squeeze out a turd? I see him do it all the time, and it always bothers me. And actually, Cole's promo wasn't that bad. I think he may have been the first guy to acknowledge the time and the date for the actual tag title match after this tournament final concludes. Apparently that's going to happen on Collision on July 29th, which is coming up real soon. What is that, 2 weeks out? I mean, that could be a heck of a TV main event. And like I talked about, while I like the idea of Cole MJF versus FTR, mostly because I know it'll be a serious match because FTR don't work comedy matches, the way they're getting there is not helping Cole and MJF's case at all. This is the second time in a row where they've gone out there and wrestled two complete underneath schlubs, didn't really beat them convincingly, and the entire match by and large was a comedy match. How is that supposed to entice me to want to see them wrestle the best tag team in the world? Point blank, it doesn't. It makes me want to see Dax and Cash go in there and plow through these fuckers in like 10 seconds. And that's probably not the reaction I'm supposed to have. The booking of this is all over the map. The dynamics between MJF and Cole are good, because MJF's a good actor. But the way they're going about this in the booking, from the whole blind eliminator tournament thing to the layout of these matches, God, is it fucking rotten. And like I said, we all know how it ends. So it's kind of predictable too, which makes it frustrating. I mean, they could throw a curveball in there and have Roddy be the one to fuck over Cole and MJF and cost them the belts. You know, he seems to be playing some kind of role in this story that people aren't really talking about in mass numbers. Maybe that's just me looking more into things than I probably should. But they could always have Roddy be the one to drive the wedge in between Cole and MJF if they didn't want to have MJF punk out Cole and make him look like the world's biggest geek. I actually kind of prefer they go that direction. Because that's what'll end up happening if MJF just turns on Cole and leaves him for dead. Cole's going to come out looking like a fucking tool for drinking the Kool-Aid. But who even knows at this point? So, from there, we had some stuff that I kind of fast-forwarded through and didn't really pay all that close attention to. One was a Jake Hager-Chris Jericho promo in the back, which sounds about as uninteresting as one could possibly imagine. The other was a Ruby Riott Sky Blue match, which, it's kind of all that needs to be said about that. And that brings us to the Nick Wayne thing. Something I've sort of been trying to wrap my head around over the last few days. When I saw this, I was trying to think of how I exactly wanted to break this down, because now there's plenty to say about it, and my thoughts are a little scatterbrained. I think the conversation kind of begins with that little video they aired prior to the actual match he wrestled this week. Far be it for me to complain about AEW actually bothering to go out of their way to air a hype package for a debuting talent. I can't even remember the last time AEW did that for anybody. How often is it that people just randomly show up, or they do the lights on, lights off bullshit where the debuting talent just appears in the ring? They've done that angle to death. So he got a hype package. Okay, cool. I didn't know anything about him, so this was helpful in getting to figure out who he was and what his upbringing was like. I kind of figured he was the son of Buddy Wayne because that's a name I've heard sporadically get thrown out over the years. I think the Wrestling Observer Figure 4 website knew him pretty well. They've had him on for interviews and special appearances over the years. I'm assuming it's not the same Buddy Wayne that worked in Memphis wrestling in like the 70s. Like I said, didn't know all that much about Buddy, didn't know anything about his son Nick, but apparently the story goes, Nick started training with his dad at the age of 9, He was basically a backyarder, which is a common thread with a lot of these young kids these days. Buddy was at least formerly trained, so he was able to teach Nick some of the basics, it seems. And I think it was not too long after Nick started training where he found out one day that his father died. I think I read somewhere it was due to complications with lung tissue scarring. I don't know what the medical term is, but something related to that. Kind of a touching story. You know, Nick wasn't the greatest narrator when he was trying to run all this down. He was kind of dry and vanilla. Didn't really seem to show all that much personality. But he's been working the indies ever since. And, what do they say? He's 19 years old? He definitely looks it. He's got that Dominic Mysterio babyface look. I know Dom's a heel right now. I'm just talking about the facial features. Very clean shaven. It's the first thing that stood out to me. Not a lot of facial hair. They'll grow it. Now, as for the match Nick had, it was against Swerve Strickland, who, keep in mind, Bayou, we just saw come out earlier in the show and fuck Darby Allin out of the Blind Eliminator tournament. So Darby, who we also found out was actually good friends with Nick Wayne and kept tabs on him over the years, of course, he's out there watching from the entryway, not bothering to go after Swerve. The same guy that screwed him over less than an hour prior and fucked him out of a chance at gold. Nah, he doesn't give a shit. So anyway, Nick's match. How do we critique it? Positives and negatives? Well, I already kind of went over the positives. The video was good. I appreciated that they bothered to explain who a new talent was and why I should care. I now know enough information about Nick to see that they obviously think he's a big deal. In terms of the look, he's kind of got that modern youth look. I always kind of joke to myself when I see some of these young guys these days. He's got the Kendall Windham body. If anybody knows what Kendall Windham used to look like when he started in the business, it's not too far off of a comparison. He's very skinny, not much of a body or physique, not a lot of muscle tone, not much of a tan. He's very athletic, as most green wrestlers are these days. You know, I saw him do a few basics here with Swerve, but I think he was mostly relying on a lot of aerial stunts since he was trying to get all that in to sort of get people acquainted to his wrestling style. And again, that's where the greenness shows in a lot of these cases. He didn't noticeably fuck up or botch or screw anything up from what I saw. There were a few sloppy things in the execution, but, you know, Swerve has been around long enough to where he could carry and guide Nick around for a lot of it. That was fine. I think Nick may have benefited from wrestling somebody a little more mat-based, just so we could see more of the basics and fundamentals from him before we see him dish out every high spot in the book. That was my biggest gripe about the whole match, was that by the end of it, I still don't know whether or not Nick Wayne can wrestle. I know he can do spots, but can he wrestle? There's a difference. Does he know how to lay out a match? Does he know how to sell? Does he know when to sell? For how long? When does he make the comeback? When does he build up to the finish? How does he build up to the finish? Like, these are all things he's going to have to get accustomed to if he wants to make a living in this business. Now, the great thing for a guy like Nick Wayne is that he has plenty of time to do all that if he's willing to learn with and work with guys that are going to help him get better. The issue then becomes, what crew is he going to hang out with? The Dynamite indie dorks aren't going to teach him jack shit. I mean, they got some names on Collision that I would love to see Nick work with at some point. You want to draw sympathy on the guy? Put him in there with Miro. Put him in there with Billy Gunn. Put him in there with a big guy that Nick can feed and sell for and learn how to show facials. You know, even Christian Cage would be a great guy to pair him with. Christian's a great heat magnet. I think Nick could get some mileage out of working a program with him in the long term. Just keep him as far away from Chris Jericho as possible, and we'll be in good shape. You know it's only a matter of time, though. The thing, though, is I don't want to immediately dismiss him because it's one showing. And unlike a lot of these geeks I see work on Dynamite, the fact that I have a backstory with Nick Wayne, that's a good start. You know, if they would have thrown this guy out there cold with no hype, I'd have probably been quicker to say, to hell with it. He's like every other no-namer on this show, never going to learn how to work. He's all spot-oriented. Fuck him. But I actually want to see what they do with him. I'm genuinely interested. Like I said, the fact that they gave him a promo package kind of indicates to me that they obviously see him as a big deal. There's something there. Maybe. I mean, he didn't beat Swerve, so there's always a chance to do a rematch later on once he gets more experience. And that was actually a good booking call. I really think that Swerve going over here was the right decision. I don't think they ought to be pushing this kid on TV immediately or have him go out there every week. But a couple times a month, you know, have him rack up a few wins on the Rampage show with working some job matches or some squash matches, beat a couple jobbers. Then you send him back to the flagship show and start having him work his way up the ranks. I mean, ideally, that's how you build a star. That would be the right way to go. You know, having him go out there and basically do, what do you even call this, like a tryout match? Sure. I mean, it was a decent first showing, but the other thing we're eventually going to have to figure out is whether or not the guy can talk. Can he do a promo? Judging by what I heard him say in the pre-tape, it doesn't sound like he's all that natural. So he's going to need to work on that. But again, who's going to teach him? Who's going to direct him? Are they going to teach him? Does he need a mouthpiece? I mean, these are questions they're going to have to consider if they want to make Nick some kind of a special attraction down the road. He's got a lot of work. It's a rough road ahead. But if he doesn't get stuck in the indie mentality, like his shit don't stink and that he's already got the business figured out, I can maybe see something for him down the road. Probably not as a main event guy, but as a serviceable mid-carder, sure. And there's nothing wrong with that. There really isn't. He's got more hope and promise than most of the people I saw in this main event calamity. I'm just going to cut to the chase with all this because everything about this main event angle with the BCC and the Elite was so amateur and low rent. Out comes Don Callis to reveal the fifth member of the BCC for War Games next week. And, well, I guess for no other reason than Kenny Omega's an idiot, he decides to interrupt Don and immediately charge to the ring so he could try to beat him up. And, of course, he immediately gets cut off by Takeshita, Claudio, and Flatwheel, who I guess were just conveniently waiting around expecting Omega to run out like a goddamn fool. Turns out they were right. Because nobody thought any of this through. Logistics, not for an Elite segment. They just fly by the seat of their pants. They have no idea how to put together a wrestling segment. So they're wailing away on Omega until who should run out to attack but Pac? Pac. We have not seen this man. We have not heard from him in months. We have no idea what he's been up to or what his relationship is to anybody in this story. But for some reason, unbeknownst to anyone except the people that are poorly constructing this storyline, Pac just randomly returns here and reveals himself to be the fifth man for the heels. All because Kenny Omega shattered his nose bone. And at the moment I heard Pac in his thick UK accent say the words, Nose bone. I immediately started laughing. That is when this segment became comedy. I need to clip that. That was too good. Guy's still in great shape. I'll give him that. It's unfortunate that he's lowered himself to this because I actually used to be a big Pac fan back in the day. Remember the good old days when he was the NXT champion and he was doing the stuff with, was it Sammy he was working with down there? Of course, he wasn't going by Pac. I forget what he wrestled as in the WWE. Something stupid. Neville, that was it. Neville, yeah. The most unattractive male name in the English language next to Keith. But of course, that's only one side of the coin. Because then we get this ridiculous angle where the heels are beating the shit out of Omega. It's like 4 or 5-on-1 gang assault. I have no clue where Moxley was in all this. He seemingly vanished for no reason. I assume he's still involved in the cage match next week, but who even knows? Maybe he finally gigged himself too deep and broke an artery. Anyway, so they're pinning Omega down with a folding chair. And because the Elite are into theatrics, they had to play act this skit by dramatically having Dawn hold a microphone in front of Omega to ask him who their fifth guy is. Who is it? Do you have a fifth guy? And mind you, while Omega has this chair up against his throat, they're choking this man. They're cutting off circulation to his brain. But he's still able to muster up the energy to say, "No, we have a fifth man too." And it's Kota Ibushi. Yeah, remember last week when I was saying how I hope the fifth guy for the babyface team isn't Kota Ibushi? When I just kind of passively threw that name out there as a joke? I wasn't joking, guys. I actually meant that. Christ. By the way, do I even need to mention the stupidity of the fact that while the heels are ganging up on Omega, Pac is positioned on the top rope about to do a corkscrew splash on him? And of course, while Omega's doing his long, dramatic, struggling promo, they do the blackout. They show the full Kota Ibushi video package, the whole goddamn highlight reel. And then when the lights come back on, that's when the Beta Bucks and Hangman Page hit the ring to run off the heels. Why the fuck did the heels stop beating up Kenny? Why didn't Pac just kill him with the splash? Why does every bad guy just stop beating up somebody if they see someone appear on a big screen or somebody's running down the aisleway? Is that not the most illogical thing you've ever seen in modern pro wrestling? Or if someone's music hits, they have to stop the attack so they can slowly turn and look at the ramp to see who's coming? As if the music already doesn't indicate who it is? So yeah, this is all garbage. And I'm just going to leave this with you before we jump to the retro report. Take the people that were already into this whole Elite versus BCC feud from the very beginning. Remove them from the conversation for a minute here. If you're somebody watching casually, have they done anything in the last month and a half to get you to care about this War Games match? Blood and Guts, whatever they're calling it. Is there any reason to care about this feud, period? Much less the match? What is the story? Have they ever explained it? I can't even remember what prompted these teams to start fighting. I think they just randomly started attacking each other. I'd have to go back in the archives to find this out, but I'm pretty sure that 1 week on television, we just saw the Elite and the BCC fighting for God knows what reason. There was never any explanation for it. There was never any real drama to it. They just started fighting. And we have seen that nonstop for the last 5 months. That's all it's been. Brawl angle after brawl angle after brawl angle after fucking brawl angle. And keep in mind, this upcoming Blood and Guts match, it is happening after all of that anarchy bullshit we saw back at the May pay-per-view. Now they're basically going to turn around and do the exact same thing inside a cage. At least we'll be able to track more than 50% of the action. We won't get rapid-fire camera cuts every 13 seconds. But we all know how predictable the whole thing's going to be. Everyone's going to do a bunch of hardcore, unprofessional-looking bullshit. Half, if not the majority of the guys involved are probably going to bleed. Mox will be the first guy to walk around passing the blade around everybody. Give everybody hepatitis. Nothing's going to make sense. It's going to go on forever. Then they'll probably have Eddie Kingston somehow screw up things at the end and fuck over the BCC because, well, he and Claudio are still pissed for whatever reason. Does that sound like a reasonable projection? I'm just basing my logic off of every illogical Elite BCC segment we've ever seen. Everything they do is virtually the same. Ibushi and Pac being out there aren't going to change anything. We'll see what happens. I expect a 45 to 60 minute clusterfuck car crash with way too much crap going on and me wondering when it's all going to end. Those are my expectations. All right, baby. 1987 Bash Tour is in full swing. We are 1 week removed from the match beyond, Daddy. The first ever War Games is officially in the books on this date in 1987. And boy, did I forget how much fanfare they gave that thing. Can't tell you how long it's been since I've gone back and watched that match in its entirety. You know, I kept telling myself I should probably include it as part of the retro review series, but just there was no way I was going to be able to fit it in with my schedule. But it is a very instrumental match in the history of professional wrestling. That match right there, that left a legacy. And there's a reason that match was so successful and carried on throughout the business for another 30 plus years on and off, obviously. But, you know, it was such a unique concept for the time. And because of the stakes involved, you know, they needed to make sure that they had the right talent pool in there to feature. And I don't think it could have gotten any better than the Road Warriors, Paul Ellering, and the superpowers of Dusty and Nikita versus the Four Horsemen plus JJ. There's your 10 stablemates of Crockett Promotions right there in 1987. The core foundation, if you will. You know, and of course, this was all about focusing on the fallout and everything that went down in that match. So Tony and David are there at the beginning to tell us that there were 2 severe injuries sustained in that match. One was JJ and the other was Nikita. And they were going to show everything that went down a little bit later on. But first, here's Jim Crockett Jr. to talk about the raging success of the first War Games and where we go from there. In fact, it was so hard-hitting and so brutal and took such a toll on everybody's bodies. The boys said, "Fuck it, let's do it again." So it is now set for the Orange Bowl in Miami, July 31st, War Games 2. This time with some modifications to the roster pool because of the JJ and Nikita injuries. The match where I believe we see Bubba Rogers return as the War Machine. And that was only for a brief stint before he sort of phased out from Crockett TV and ended up dipping out shortly thereafter when he finished up his run in the UWF. And then by the summer of '88, he's on his way to the WWF, and thus the Big Boss Man is born. Not to get too ahead of myself, though. From there, we went to the ring for the Rock and Roll Express versus Gary Phelps and Eric Long. They mentioned during this match that Jim Cornette was going to be back on the show today, but he had also recently been injured, which is something I had completely forgotten about until they mentioned it. The second ACL tear that sort of went under the radar and basically prevented Courtney from making any of the dates on the Bash Tour. And I remember it was during some kind of angle involving the Rock and Roll Express where they're trying to do some big brawl or some type of angle. And it was just one of those freak accidents where Courtney went to lunge off the ring apron, or he took some kind of bump, landed wrong on his knee, and poof, out goes the other ACL. After he literally just had reconstruction surgery on the first one from the scaffold bump at the end of '86. Now he's basically forced to miss the entirety of the Bash Tour in '87. Or at least the majority of it. I can't remember what he explained in the recounting of this time frame. But anyway, getting back to the match, Tony and David talked about some more guest appearances on the show for today. Meanwhile, Ricky and Robert did some moves while the fans were unanimously chanting, "Double drop kick." So naturally, as one might think, the babyface thing to do would be, all right, the fans want the double drop kick, so let's give them the double drop kick. Oh, how you'd be wrong. Because apparently, for whatever reason, Ricky and Robert randomly decided that this would be the week to turn heel on the studio fans. So instead, they do this horrible finish where Robert goes to whip one of the jobbers off the ropes. He gives him a punch to the gut, and I guess the job guy taking the punch just decided, well, shit, I got sucker punched, so I should just probably stop running. So he stops dead in his tracks, hunches himself over, and then Ricky just sort of grabs him and gives him a tilt-a-whirl backslide for the 3. My notes conclude with, well, that finish fucking sucked. And then after Ricky and Robert decided to be douchebags to the fans and not give them their patented double dropkick finish, they had the gall to do a promo telling us to buy tickets to see all of their matches on the Bash Tour. What jerks. And then we came back for a Dr. Death squash with Alan Martin, still sporting the thick cast on his left arm after that heinous attack from Dick Murdoch on UWF television, at which point we were then told that Dr. Death is out for revenge against Bubba Rogers. Because that made total sense. And this match was so awesome. The whole thing went like 2 minutes, but for about 90 seconds of those 2 minutes, Dr. Death is in there just working over Martin's arm. He's got him cranked in some holds on the mat. They're kind of laying around for a little bit. The crowd is literally sitting on their hands, not reacting at all. And finally, Steve just goes, fuck, dude. This crowd's kind of dead. I got to give him something to react to. At which point, he then stands up. He does a series of running football tackle charges out of the corner, followed by an Oklahoma stampede for the finish. At which point, the crowd showered him with praise. All it took was Dr. Death steamrolling over a guy and killing him with a tackle. That was enough to wake everybody up. And then he does a meandering promo after the break, He started off by talking about how he's going to be traveling to see his doctor to get some more x-rays done on his left arm. Then he starts talking about the UWF heavyweight title match with Bubba in Oklahoma, his backyard. And, well, then he just kind of started mumbling over himself and losing his train of thought. He's trying to put over how long he's been pursuing the UWF title, saying he's been going around and around and around, but now he's going, quote, straight through. I wrote down in all caps, what? There was a point here where he said that the UWF title would look great around his chest, and then he had to correct himself mid-promo and say waist. This was just... Well, it fell off the map. That's probably the kindest way I can put it. Love Dr. Death. God love the guy. God rest his soul. He was never all that great a promo. But he still looked like he could beat your ass. So I would never tell him that to his face. Speaking of guys that would have no problem beating your ass, here comes Ron Simmons. And, well, if you recall from last week, Ron did a promo on the show basically insinuating that he was going to have Dr. Death's back. So he just came out here to wish him luck in his title match. It was cool seeing them together on camera. And again, it all goes back to that conversation we've had about the roster rotation going on around this period. A lot of newer, fresher guys showing up. You know, they're really trying to get a lot of new people over at once. And again, I remind you, in 5 years' time, Ron Simmons is the World Heavyweight Champion in this company. Just something to keep in the back of your head as we see his development on television. And then on the polar opposite end of that conversation, good Lord, how long has it been since I uttered this name on the channel? Of all TV matches for them to book on this program, here is what we have next. Dexter Westcott versus Bugsy McGraw. Jesus Christ. All those jokes I used to make in our early World Class reviews from like 82 to early 83 when Bugsy McGraw was all over that show. And how many times did I say, he's the handsome Jimmy Valiant of the Dallas region in the early 80s? Well, lo and behold, here he is on Crockett TV in 1987. Now, if you've never seen a Bugsy McGraw match in your spare time, I should encourage you to go out of your way to watch some of his earlier footage. If you thought Handsome Jimmy was out of his mind on this show, dude, go watch 15 seconds of a Bugsy McGraw match. He'll make Jimmy Valiant look like fucking Dean Malenko. And God bless the guy. When we were reviewing those Bugsy matches on Dallas TV a year or so back, I was talking about how old and broken down he was then. That was in 1982. Here he is in 1987 in Crockett Promotions. If you've seen any comedy skit of Curly Howard from like the 1940s, that's basically Bugsy McGraw in the confines of a wrestling ring. He goes out there with Martin and does all of his slapstick gestures, the wacky moonwalk, rubbing his head whenever Martin would punch him. It's like straight out of a Three Stooge skit. And on the subject of Handsome Jimmy, I should also point out, there was a moment here where David Crockett actually had the balls to suggest that Handsome Jimmy and Bugsy would make a great tag team on this show. A long stream of pee began to run down the side of my leg at that very moment. Tony just blew him off and didn't even acknowledge it. Probably thinking, fuck you for even suggesting that, David. And after some wretched offense from Bugsy, he finally won with a running splash. At which point, right before their commercial, Tony goes, Don't we have an interview with him later on? And there's about a 5-second pause before David finally goes, I'll let you handle that one. Now that was a good line. Almost made up for David's asinine comment about how Handsome Jimmy and Bugsy would make a great tag team on this show. In 1987. No. Even Dusty would have put the kibosh on that. So then we come back for the greatest promo of all time. The Four Horsemen are all at the booth. And as we established earlier, JJ suffered one of those serious injuries inside War Games. So he's out there with his arm wrapped in a cast, talking about the grave miscarriage of justice that went down inside that match. He explains that he never should have been in War Games to begin with. In fact, he got caught up in the heat of the moment, and Jim Crockett suckered him into doing the match unlawfully. And it was at that point when JJ was locked inside that cage where he realized that all of the babyfaces conspired to single him out. It was a deliberate assault on the most defenseless man inside that cage. A man in the twilight of his wrestling career, damn it. And the Road Warriors deliberately went out of their way to end his career for good. The no-good bastards. So JJ is here to assure us that he is an ambassador, not a full-time professional wrestler anymore. And they actually play the footage of the JJ injury angle at the Omni. And one of the best slow-mo recaps to a match I've ever seen, where the Legion of Doom have JJ up for a belly-to-back clothesline spot, and they actually show JJ coming directly down on top of his shoulder. So part of me was wondering if that worked injury was actually more than a work, because that looked pretty brutal on the landing, even in slow motion. Now, of course, Flair's pissed off about the whole situation, saying the Road Warriors had no right to intentionally try to destroy JJ's career with that malicious attack. But JJ is here to reassure us that he has an insurance policy. Since the rematch of War Games is already booked for Miami on July 31st, JJ has taken it upon himself to make sure that the Horsemen have full backup inside the double cage. And that insurance policy is none other than totally not Big Bubba Rogers under a ninja mask. No. This is the 6'9", 437-pound War Machine. And, he looked about 8'7" standing behind JJ in that dark room. Probably had him standing on one of those elevated podiums. And 437 pounds, you say? I don't know about all that. At his peak, I don't think Bubba ever really surpassed like 330. Maybe 340 during his earlier runs. But yeah. This is what they had in mind for Big Bubba's return. After he had been down in the UWF for a period. Having him serving as the muscle bodyguard for the Midnight Express for the better part of 86. Now he's generic big masked villain who is out there to take the fall inside War Games because, well, the babyfaces need to beat somebody. No wonder Bubba left for the WWF in 88. Who could blame the guy? God, they gave him the shaft. So then, oh, and by the way, Flair talked for another few minutes and literally killed his voice. It was every raging Ric Flair promo you've ever heard. Smoke was coming out of every hole in his body. That they were going to have to put him out with a fire extinguisher to cool him off. And then we come back for Barry Windham versus Clement Fields, which I regret to inform you was not as raging as the Horseman promo about a minute ago. We did, however, get to see Barry sport his new Western States Heavyweight Championship. And it is, in fact, a very nice belt design. It's just a simple fact that not a single person in the world, including myself, gave two fucks about Barry as the Western States Heritage Heavyweight Champion. They pan some camera shots around to some of the girls in the studio. Most of them look bored to tears. My notes literally read, Barry did a few moves and then one with a lariat. There's nothing else to add. And then they followed that, probably with what amounted to be the greatest babyface promo of Jimmy Garvin's entire run. Now, I've been very outspoken here, if you've been listening to my Crockett reviews for a while. Haven't been the biggest fan of babyface Jimmy Garvin, especially when we're concurrently reviewing his stuff on World Class right now, a few years prior when he was like one of the best heels in the entire company. The whole babyface thing with him just hasn't resonated with me from the whole Ron Garvin fireball angle from back in February. I mean, he's trying. Can't deny the fact that he's doing everything to make it work. The fans love him. But I still prefer heel Jimmy Garvin. In any case, he's going out there and ripping Flair a new asshole. And of course, standing next to him is his main squeeze, Precious, wearing a denim jacket with the long signature satin gloves. That is a look I don't think I've ever seen pulled off before. Only Precious, though. She's the only one that could do that. And meanwhile, there's Ronnie Garvin in a tie-dyed short-sleeve Henley. So I can't even agree that Precious's outfit was the most egregious in this scenario. Ronnie had her beat. Anyway, this promo was great. Jimmy's running down all the wicked things he's going to do to that spineless, perverted Ric Flair, saying there's no way in hell he's going to let his guard down long enough to allow Flair to win Precious for one night. He says that Ronnie's personally taking it upon himself to wake up Jimmy every morning at 6 a.m. for intense training. And that's all Jimmy's been doing every day to prepare for this match in Greensboro. Eat, sleep, train, shit, repeat. I also added here for comic relief. Hopefully they were not wearing tie-dye during their training. Speaking of Ronnie, he added a little bit here. He went over all the various exercises that he's made Gorgeous Jimmy go through. Squats, lunges, deadlifts, push-ups, anything to make him puke, sweat, and cry. And, he basically said that Jimmy's going to take Flair to the limit. And I rewinded this like 7 times to try and figure out what the hell he was saying. The best I could come up with was, quote, Flair, you can bet your sweet farn up that Gorgeous Jimmy is going to take the world's title from you. Like I said, I rewound it over and over again. I have no clue what the fuck he meant. I looked up the word farn up using the online dictionary. As of 2023, it's not a word. But you never know. Maybe in 10 years, someone else will use it and they'll update the English language with more made-up words that nobody ever uses. And they've been doing it with the genders for the last 5 to 10 years, so who knows? But again, this promo was awesome. Other than my obligatory insider nitpick about babyfaces making promises that they don't end up fulfilling in the end, Gorgeous Jimmy out there promising that he would become the World Heavyweight Champion by beating Flair. Yeah. Sad to say that never happened. But then, we come back for a good old-fashioned Freebird 6-man. Where the hell have these guys been? Haven't seen Hayes, Gordy, and Roberts on this show in a hot minute. But they're back. And they're here to wrestle the job squad of David Isley, Cougar J, and Larry Stevens. Probably 3 of the worst job guys I had working the studio shows at the time, which made it like 10 times more entertaining. One of the first spots in this match was David Isley trying to hit a running crossbody attack onto Gordy off the ropes. This did not go according to plan, as they probably anticipated. Basically, David ducked a clothesline, he ran directly at Gordy. Gordy kind of sort of caught him in a bear hug position and then just fell down. So I think Gordy said, "Fuck this." And he proceeded to kick the ever-loving shit out of this clown. I think Isley had heat with Gordy for the rest of the match. Because once he tagged out, anytime Gordy was the legal guy, you could see him look over his shoulder occasionally at Isley on the ring apron, probably looking at him like he was the biggest piece of crap on the planet. He's like, if I get my hands on that guy again, I'm going to wreck his shit. Gordy was the sole highlight of this. Just because of the fact that he looked visibly pissed off after that first botched spot. He had a chip on his shoulder. At a later point in the match, he and Cougar Jay are fumbling around trying to set up a headlock takeover spot. So again, Gordy, the veteran, said, "Nope." And he dumped Jay directly on the back of his neck and immediately killed him. David Crockett was overcome with joy. And from there, they did some more spots for a while until Buddy tagged in at the end, almost lost his footing trying to do a top rope crossbody onto Cougar Jay, and they got the 3 count. At least Buddy executed the crossbody, though, unlike David the Bosch Isley. That was probably a direct rib on Buddy's part. He's like, "Here's how you do it, motherfucker." They also had a fun follow-up promo. Didn't really have much to say, but I did like Hayes' comment about how the Bash Tour continues for the Freebirds in Greensboro, in Chicago, in Charlotte, in our hotel room. And then he turned to Tony and smiled. Died. He also took a minute to put over Gordy and Buddy. He also mentioned during his promo, the Freebirds have accomplished many things in their career, but there's one thing Hayes is yet to hold. He wants the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. And boy howdy, there's a major rabbit hole right there we could dive into if we wanted to. The ultimate what-if scenario in wrestling history. You know, you probably don't ever put much thought into it, just because of the reputation the Freebirds have in wrestling. You focus so much on them as a unit, and you never take the time to really sit down and ask, could they have actually made Gordy or Hayes the singles world champion at some point? I mean, you look at the scope of WCW by the early 90s. Let me try and remember. So Hayes left and came back. What year? Was that 89 he rejoined WCW? Obviously, that was by the time the buyout occurred. I remember he and Gordy won the World Tag titles, and that was when Jimmy Garvin ended up joining with them as the third Freebird since Buddy wasn't around by that point. I think that was 89. You know, once we start getting into the later period, though, my memory's a little hairy. I think he and Garvin stayed as a tag team for a while once Gordy left, and that basically left them with 2 Freebirds for a while. For the life of me, I can't recall much of what Hayes was doing from like 90 to 92 or 93 whenever he left the company again. Because he was in WWF by, was it like 94 or 95? I don't think he ever had much of a singles run in WCW. I could be wrong about that, but it's been so freaking long. But you really do wonder, if Hayes would have stayed babyface for a period, could he and Flair have drawn some money as the top world title program at some point? Maybe even Flair and Gordy. It's hard to say. I don't think Gordy would have ended up working in the long haul just because he wasn't around long enough for them to even consider giving him a main event push. Hayes is a different story, though. Like I said, it's a cool discussion to have. If I had another 20 to 30 minutes, I could probably go into more detail about it. But, well, we'll be seeing more of Michael Hayes down the road, so we can always talk about it later on. For now, though, we have other matters to discuss. Take, for example, the next match. Ron Simmons versus Tommy Angel. My first question in all caps reads, why the fuck did this get so much time? My second question, of all people to let get an offense on Ron Simmons, they let Tommy Angel be the guy to work him over for the heat? Whoever made that decision should have been immediately fired. Aside from that, Simmons tried some more moves. If you remember his debut match last week, it was mostly tackles and arm drags. Here, he at least broke out a backdrop and a vertical suplex. And then he just went over with the tackle anyway. Still green. But like I said, he gets better. And give him about 10 more years to establish his catchphrase in the WWF. He got memes for decades. To think, all Ron Simmons had to do was show up one day and do some cameos where he just said, damn! That's all it took. And he was over for the rest of his career. He made boatloads of money just by randomly showing up on Raw and interjecting himself. Legendary. Speaking of legendary, we had the best fucking promo of all time. Remember when I said the Horseman promo earlier on was the best promo of all time? That was an outright lie, because I neglected to mention this promo. Here comes Bugsy McGraw, whacked out as only Bugsy could be. The only wrestler alive that can show up on live national television and complain that no one's directing him with cues as to what camera he's supposed to look at. And of course, if you've ever heard Bugsy talk before, trust me, I've listened to several of his promos in Dallas. I have never been able to make heads or tails on what the fuck that guy says half the time. He's out there trying to name drop a bunch of guys he's going to wrestle on the Bash Tour, while at the same time asking what camera he's supposed to be looking at. I should also point out that he had to ask Tony Schiavone what his name was, because, well, to be frank, I honestly would not be all that shocked if no one cued Bugsy into who the announcers' names were. That is how out the lunch he was. And I honestly can't do this justice. It was train wreck level horrible on every level. The best part was when he was trying to talk about all the cities he was going to be visiting. And I'm not shitting you. This is an exact quote. I wrote it down verbatim. Bash Tour, baby. I'll be in Daytona and, well, you know, I can't think of any other ones right now, but I'll be there, baby. I'm there. Fucking howling. I am rolling on the floor at this point. And he's going on and on and on. This promo will not end. It may still be going on to this day. There might be a doppelganger Tony Schiavone in Atlanta right now interviewing Bugsy McGraw from beyond the grave. I've seen plenty of promos where guys forget their lines or just lose their train of thought. I mean, we see it plenty on these studio shows where guys are sent out there to just try and wing it. Some of them fall flat on their face. But poor Bugsy, dude. He just couldn't remember jack shit. He was so out of his element. He had no idea where to look at the camera, no idea who the announcers were, didn't even know what fucking cities he was going to end up wrestling in. Kind of makes me wonder how his travel schedule worked. Did he just show up at random venues around the country hoping that was going to be the next stop for the Bash Tour? Turns out he showed up in Daytona when he was supposed to be in fucking Charlotte or Lakeland. That'd have been great. They should have sent a private cameraman around to follow Bugsy McGraw. Just shows up to all the empty venues wondering where everybody is. If you have the Peacock subscription, you got to go watch this promo. It is so bad. So terrible. But I watched it over and over again. I couldn't stop laughing. And it didn't help matters any when we came back for this Dusty promo. I think Dusty was on a mission here. He said, I am not to be outclassed by Bugsy McGraw and nonsensical rambling promos about nothing. I'm going to go out there and cut the most long-winded, nonsensical promo of 1987. That'll show him. Between him going on and on about God knows what, and that fucking hair comb, that is where I lost it. He's out there doing this promo, and I'm just sitting there covering my face the entire time because I cannot stop staring at that giant red comb that Dusty had lodged into his afro. I'm like, what is he doing? And why did he think that was a good idea? It wasn't even like properly placed. It looked like he literally just shoved it in there 2 seconds before coming out to do this promo. He's like, has anybody seen my comb, daddy? Oh, there it is. Now time to go cut my promo on Crockett Television. It's the most ridiculous thing. And then on top of that, there's the outfit. I am not exaggerating. White sneakers with red oversized jogger pants, a t-shirt, graphic t-shirt, and a custom blazer. It is the epitome of only an outfit that Dusty could pull off. Anybody else that tried to pull off this look is immediately declared douchebag. Not Dusty. Because you know what? I expect nothing less. That man had quite the wardrobe. He bought pieces. He never thought to himself, how can I match these pieces? No. He just bought shit and he wore it on television, regardless of whether or not it was color coordinated or properly fitted. He was the man. Dusty was the fucking man. Anyway, I have no idea what else happened here. He eventually brought out Nikita, who was carrying a neck brace with him. I think his point was that he refuses to wear the brace because he still wants to fight inside War Games, regardless of injury. And that's when I remember them announcing earlier on that Nikita had gotten injured in that match. The only other thing I noted here was Dusty's final line where he talked about trying to recruit all the blacks, all the whites, all the greens, and all the yellows to the Orange Bowl to see War Games in Miami. To which I said, okay, so he wants to recruit black people, white people, Asian people, and I guess all the studio jobbers who suck at wrestling, so maybe they could learn a thing or two. That's what I got out of it. Or maybe he was talking about the Midnight Express, who are sporting all green this week. Jim Cornette out there in the green blazer, Bobby and Stan in the green ring gear. Corny also back at the studio to introduce his boys. Also to provide us with a health update. Now his claim was that the Rock and Roll Express deliberately targeted his bad knees because they knew Corny was still hurting from last year's scaffold match. So they tried to break his legs and put him out of commission for good. The stinking yellow belly cowards. Oh, the match. I should probably add. Bobby and Stan versus Mike Jackson and Terry Jones. So at least they had one competent job guy in there. In any case, Eaton and Lane beat him up. They toyed with him. They fucked around with him forever. Eaton ended up driving Corny's crutch into Terry's face on the floor. I presume the ref was distracted for that spot. Elsewise, that would have been a blatant DQ otherwise. I did like, too, Stan making sure to massage Terry's shoulders just to relieve him from any of the tension caused from having a crutch rammed into his throat. Because that's the first thing I would have done if I were struck in the throat with a foreign object. Let me massage your shoulders. That ought to help. The finish was great. Cornette yells for Stan to go after the legs of Terry, just to send a message to the Rock and Roll Express. So, Stan proceeds to lock in a one-armed Scorpion Deathlock for the immediate submission, made better by Beautiful Bobby immediately going in there to stomp on Terry's knees, just to inflict further damage. Because, well, he's a dick. And, well, I'll talk about the main event in a sec. Quick Midnight's promo after the break here to round out their match. Corny promised that the Midnights were going to teach him a lesson in respect. Says that Ricky and Robert will be fighting for their lives, just like Corny continues to fight every day to get off those crutches. Even if they have to wheel him out there in an iron lung, he's going to be there at ringside for his boys. Now I know where the iron lung catchphrase spawns from. Not much of the promo other than that. And then for our TV main event. Now, I want you to think all the matches we've seen on this program today. And now I want you to guess what they decided to book as the TV main event for this episode of Crockett TV on the Saturday Superstation. The match they went with was Misty Blue versus Kat LaRue. I can only dream of how badly the ratings tanked. Thankfully, it wasn't long enough to completely kill the crowd. But yeah, when I saw the final match for this week was a girls' match with Misty Blue, I immediately pooped myself. I was like, this is either going to be hideously dull or outright abysmal. It was, at best, bad. It got worse the longer it went. I think we've reviewed one Misty Blue match on this program in the last 7 months. From what I remember, it was nothing to write home about. Maybe I was just paying a little more attention this time, but, yeah. Really didn't take my breath away. I particularly like the spot where after Misty dumped Kat face first from a fireman's carry position, Kat then proceeded to cut Misty off guard by punching her directly in the vagina. And Teddy responded by going, "Hey, watch the closed fists." Word. At which point, things completely went off the rails as the girls began trading leg submissions. Misty, I think, attempted to apply a Scorpion Deathlock. Not only did it take her almost a full 30 seconds to set this up properly, but then she proceeded to just randomly let go of the hold. I couldn't tell if Kat got a rope break or if Misty just lost her grip. In any case, the match continued until randomly, we just hear Tony go, "Fans, we're out of time. We'll see you next week." And they very quickly cut away from this match as the girls continued to trade sloppy spots back and forth where they were totally blown up. You have never seen a more abrupt cut. They were like, we got to get out and we got to get out now. Yeah, this sucked. And I can merely speculate. I have no proof of this. But judging how quickly they cut away from this match at the end, I take it things only got progressively worse from then on, to the point where even the production team said, maybe it's in our best interest to just cut out the rest of this match because goddamn is this horrible. I don't blame them. Kind of a shitty, abrupt way to end the program, but hey, gotta fit in some of that whammons wrestling, It's the popular thing to do these days. I had some fun with this one, though. Not as much fun as last week, but between that legendary Bugsy promo, Dusty's weird-ass monologue while he had that stupid comb in his hair, Jimmy Garvin's great babyface promo, the follow-up with War Games, there was a lot of enjoyable content this week. The wrestling mostly sucked, but, it's usually not the sole focus of these studio shows. We all know the bulk of the TBS Superstation programs are geared toward the promos and angles, and that's where the conversation mostly boils down to. Sometimes the matches have their memorable standout moments. See the Freebirds match this week as an example. Train wreck television, but boy is it entertaining. But we are in the thick of the Bash Tour right now. Still a very exciting period. Lots of surprises showing up, new faces, old faces, and we'll keep getting more Bash Tour updates through the entire month of July. We already have the first War Games recorded, and it's only an uphill trajectory from there. Or at least we so think. Speaking of uphill trajectories, I don't think that's where we're headed with World Class in the next few years. Judging by how a lot of these shows have been lately, Not that we also don't have 30 plus years of history to indicate otherwise. No, actually the show is mostly fine. I had no memory of anything I just saw the previous week. To my knowledge, it wasn't anything remarkable. But I had those occasional moments where I watch some of these classic shows, especially World Class. When Mercer announced the main event at the top of the program this week was Kevin Von Erich and Chris Adams versus Killer Khan and Terry Gordy, the first thing I asked was, did they not just book this exact match 2 or 3 weeks ago? I didn't have time to go back in my notes from previous document files, but I could have sworn we've already seen this match. Maybe you swap out Kevin with Kerry or something. In any case, it goes to show how little I've remembered about this program in the last month or so. It was actually something that kind of stood out watching this show as it was moving along. The story of 1984 for World Class Championship Wrestling, it basically boiled down to two things. David's death in February, and Kerry winning the NWA World Heavyweight title from Ric Flair for 2 weeks before dropping it back. We've now reached the period where we've surpassed those two stories. Now I'm sitting here in July of 1984 thinking, what the hell has happened on this show in the last 2 months that I can recall off the top of my head? I remember the Freebirds Von Erich conference brawl and sporadic moments of greatness from Gino Hernandez. Elsewise, there's nothing happening on this show right now. And I know that might seem like a Trumpism. Folks, some people say that some things have happened in World Class in the last 2 months. No, wrong. Nothing. Perhaps maybe something. No, nothing. Excuse me. No, nothing. I swear, folks, I've been watching it. Some people are very highly critical. Not me. I'd never say that World Class is on the downhill spot. Excuse me. No. So yeah, this was basically another nothing happening 45 minutes of television. We did get some minor story advancement with the Texas heavyweight title situation, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. First, we must talk about this opener. It's Scott Hog Irwin versus Mike Reed, the former better half of Wild Bill Irwin when they were the masked Super Ds. Now that they've been exposed to the public and unmasked, literally done on television as a complete throwaway angle in a stipulation match that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Super Ds won that match, and they still ended up getting unmasked in the end. Nope. Now they're back to just being the ordinary Irwin brothers. And this match was a feature for the lesser interesting of the two brothers. I just like how disappointed Bill Mercer was when he found out that the Hog nickname for Scott Irwin had nothing to do with the Harley motorcycle brand. He actually thought it meant legit pigs. Because apparently somebody thought it would be a good idea to give Scott Irwin the nickname Hog. Of all fucking names in the animal species to come up with. Not something clever like Bearcat or Jaguar or, I don't know, something dangerous or malicious. No. He settled on Hog. Look up pictures of hogs in your spare time, folks. They're very boring-looking animals. Ugly, yes, but highly uninteresting. Much like how this match was highly uninteresting. The crowd did not give a shit about it. By the end, I think Mark Lorenz announced the finish at 6 minutes and 14 seconds. It felt like it went triple that length. There was a lot of laying on the mat in chin locks, lots of riveting side headlocks that just kept people on the edge of their seats the entire time. And finally, after about an hour of boring stuff, Scott gave Mike the wonderfully coined super suplex out of the corner for the 3 count. Because it took him until, what, the fucking 90s to just call it a superplex? Anyway, this sucked. Then we had Buddy Roberts versus George Weingroff, which was slightly more interesting than the opener, but kind of a stretch. At least Buddy's actually over as a heel to the Dallas faithful, so he actually gets a reaction when he does all his dastardly heel stuff. I think this was the match where Mercer plugged his pre-tape for later on, where he had to do his sit-down with Gino at his penthouse estate. And I'll cover that when we get there. But I did like his line where he casually threw in. He just goes, "At least he let me in the front door this time. Unlike what happened with the Freebirds last time." And there's a long dramatic pause before he finally concludes with, "But he didn't let me swim." I laughed. So, Weingroff worked over Buddy's arm for a while. Buddy was able to rake his eyes and get a few minutes of heat on him. I think my favorite spot here was the over-exaggerated deal where Buddy raises the point of his elbow to drive it into the back of Weingroff's neck. But it's great because he doesn't just stand there in one place to deliver the elbow. He has to get like a 5-foot head start before he slowly comes charging at Weingroff like he's in a horror film. Like he has a giant knife that he's about to drive into the back of the guy's head. That's what Buddy looked like given this elbow. It was great. And then Weingroff was able to fire back at the end. Brief little flurry of offense. And the finish, which was rather wacky, Buddy goes for a body slam, which Weingroff turns into an abdominal stretch. And then he just randomly decided, nah, you know what? Fuck that hold. I'm just going to pin him with a cradle. And that's what he did. 1, 2, 3. It was like, no, that was kind of flat. Buddy was also pissed. Poor guy. Can never seem to catch a break. He never wins singles matches. And then when he's booked in tag matches, he's usually the one doing the job. I have not gone out of my way to track the win-loss record for Buddy Roberts in World Class from 1984. but I can venture a guess, hasn't been all that great. We're approaching like Dolph Ziggler territory of loser with the amount of jobs that guy's done. Unlike Dolph, though, at least Buddy Roberts was actually a good worker. So, moving on, I guess. We had footage from the Texas title controversy that Mercer was talking about earlier. And God, is this the most WCW thing I've ever seen? I'm not kidding when I tell you, I had to go back and rewatch this thing like 6 times in a row to figure out what the hell Mercer was trying to explain or what was happening in this video. I still don't know if I'm entirely correct in my analysis, but here's what I think was happening. So it's a tournament round with Ric Flair and Kerry Von Erich. And they're doing the vacant title deal for the Texas title. And it was basically some kind of fucked finish or ref stoppage, which prompted Gino Hernandez to come in. And somehow Bronco Lubick just ended up handing him the title and awarding him as the champion. So at the time, I thought, okay, so is this one of those Russo finishes where a guy who's not involved in the match somehow wins due to copious amounts of bullshit happening at ringside? I'd like to say I was ever caught off guard by that kind of booking, but when you saw it virtually every week on Nitro for like the last 3 years of their existence, you kind of got numb to it after a while. In any case, I don't think that's what was happening here. But I don't know what was happening. And neither did Bill Mercer. Which, to be fair, that was kind of the whole point of the clip. To basically explain, hey, Gino kind of has the Texas heavyweight title right now, and he never pinned or submitted anybody to win it, so what's going on here? Does Bronco owe him trans or something? And all that tied together with this awesome pre-tape that Mercer did with Gino. We're not only at poolside at Gino's penthouse, but of course, he's got the 2 arm candy pieces next to him, rubbing baby oil all over his chest to admire his pecs. The girl on the right was head over heels for the guy. Like, she was so ready to fuck him on the spot. You could tell by the look in her eyes. But Gino's here to basically explain that he won the Texas title. There's nothing grainy about any of that footage we saw. It was the real deal. And if the low-life 9-to-5ers and humanoids out there don't like the fact that Gino Hernandez is a dual champion right now, because you also factor in that he's the American heavyweight champion, well, then they can kiss his butt. And as far as his future objectives go, he's still after the NWA World Heavyweight Championship. And, on second thought, this wasn't as entertaining as I remember it being. The airport pre-tape was 1,000 times better. Still didn't really explain how Gino officially won the Texas title, but I guess that's going to be part of the plot development. Yet to be unveiled. He's obviously setting the stages for the big program with the Von Erichs, so we'll see how all that escalates on future episodes. And then we went back to the ring for a Gino match with Chief Joel Strongbow, now officially going by Gorgeous Gino Hernandez. Thinking Gorgeous Jimmy Garvin might have a thing or two to say about that. Anyway, before we cover the match, we need to talk about this pre-match angle. So Kerry ends up coming down and gets on the microphone to challenge Gino to put his Texas heavyweight title on the line. And, well, Gino tried to sucker punch Kerry, which ended poorly. If there's one thing you don't do in world class, it's try to kickstart a brawl angle with cheap shotting the Von Erichs. Usually doesn't work in your favor. Should be pointed out for the record, The physical exchange between Kerry and Gino got less of a reaction than Kerry ripping off his shirt. The people popped for the initial fight, but once the shirt came off and Kerry was sporting those 8-pack abs, the girls literally came in unison. And, well, they still ended up going through with the Strongbow match anyway. It was not as entertaining as the Kerry brawl. I did like the idea, though. So the heel has to expend energy in a pre-match fight and then work a full TV match with a fresh babyface? How's that fair? Well, then again, Gino was the one that threw the first punch, so I guess it was his fault. The wrestling was mostly fine. Gino gave Strongbow a decent amount of offense and fed for him well. Gino bumped and sold like crazy. Strongbow made a nice little comeback at the end until he went for some kind of running attack off the ropes. But Gino sidestepped him and then caught him with a small package for the 3. Kind of a shocking clean finish, but yeah, nothing wrong with that. We also had the great moment here. They come back, right before they went to break, Gino's walking through the crowd, and he's got the row of security flanking him. So I guess Gino, and thinking that he was untouchable in this scenario, randomly decided to start picking fights with all the fans. I wrote down in bold letters, balls. Especially when you factor in the one gentleman that he decided to pick a fight with. He was quite large. And I don't mean fat. I mean, he had some build to him. Gino walked up to this man, this very large, stocky man, and he legitimately swiped his hat clean off his head. It went flying into the void. And this fucking guy was not having Gino's bullshit. He stood up. He tried to get right in Gino's face. And the cops were there to say, nope, you can sit right down, sir. Blood will not be spilled this evening at the Sportatorium. This was, The boys had balls, man. They really did. If you hear and learn about the reputation a lot of these hostile wrestling fans had during the territory days, I mean, they were not like anything you see in today's environment. If the boys tried to get in the fans' faces, it could have ended in tragedy if they weren't careful. Some of these fans were not friendly to the heels. Pocket knives, guns, sharp objects, heavy objects. They carried it all. The most lethal were the old ladies that carried purses. I used to hear stories about how they would carry things like bricks or rocks, these really heavy objects, and they would try to throw them at the heels as they were walking by. I got this eerie sense in the pit of my stomach when I saw this large guy try to stand up to Gino in the aisleway. Thank God the cops were there, man. That's all I can say. But that brought us to the TV main event. Kevin Von Erich and Chris Adams versus Killer Khan and Terry Gordy. And actually, I just remembered this as I was running down the names here. It was Kevin and Mike versus Khan and Gordy. That was the last match I remember them doing that was kind of similar to this one. And actually, one of the first things I wrote down about this match, holy shit, Killer Khan learned some new moves. He's been scouting Gordy lately. He wasn't just using headbutts for 99% of his offense. He actually hit a backbreaker and a knee drop in succession. Progress is what we call that. For the most part, it was Gordy and Khan beating up Kevin and Adams. That was until the evident four-way breakdown at the end. Kevin made a short, fiery comeback until Gordy cut him off with a lariat and tagged in Khan to try and go for the spike. Kevin immediately put him in the Iron Claw. And, well, things kind of got muddled for a minute. The floor cam was zoomed in all the way, so while Kevin's got the claw hold on Khan, you kind of see Chris Adams run in to cut off Gordy with a super kick when he tried to break up the hold, and then the camera just sort of spazzed out until they finally went back to the hard cam for a second. And meanwhile in the melee, Buddy Roberts just sort of hits the ring for the blatant DQ and then goes after Kevin with the loaded boot. And the drill kind of repeats itself from there. Kerry runs out to even the odds. The heels get run off. Von Erich stands strong. They actually hit a cool triple dropkick spot on Gordy and Khan, which the people pop for. And then probably one of my favorite Bill Mercer moments in a while. And I'm not entirely exaggerating with my delivery here, but this is essentially what he said as he pitched to Lorenz for the time. Kevin, Chris, and Kerry send Gordy and Khan up the aisleway. Kevin, Chris, and Kerry stand strong. Kevin is bleeding. Let's go to Mark Lorenz for the time. I was like, wait a sec. Kevin's bleeding, you say? Maybe you want to stay on that for a second? Oh, just another casual day at the office. Guy blades, no big deal. Must be watching AEW. That's a John Moxley reaction whenever we see blood in his matches. BCC run-in, horrible brawl, shit's happening, Moxley's bleeding for no reason. Stay with us for picture-in-picture. So that was that. Again, though, this entire program was mostly the Gino Hernandez show. It kind of sucks how everything else has totally fallen off the map since the Texas Stadium event, but I don't know. I said it last week. They're really trying with some of the new faces that have shown up recently, but the only one that's really clicking right now is Gino. Take him out of the equation, you're kind of just left with a round table of guys. The Freebirds and the Von Erichs are givens. I don't need to include them into the conversation. But it's a weird period with World Class right now. Stuff's happening on the show, but it's just kind of middle-of-the-road material right now. The matches are mostly forgettable. These TV main events have just been a bunch of interchangeable babyface heel tag matches with top guys. There's nothing really standout or groundbreaking happening right now. Nothing's really grabbing my attention like it was maybe a year or so ago when you had a lot of different variety happening with the stories that were moving. We're less about faction warfare right now since the Devastation Inc. crew is kind of in the background. Jimmy Garvin is still doing the story with Stella Mae French, and, that's a good story, but it also took a back seat this week. But I think they've even peaked so far with that promo she did with Bill Mercer and her giant truck weeks back. The penalty box angle was great, but, the follow-up since then hasn't been all that great. So hopefully we see more involvement with that story going forward. But, yeah, like I said, it's one of those things where I'm watching the show right now and nothing's really captivating at the moment. Now, we still have a few more years before things completely fall off the map entirely, but, yeah, we're sort of waving some red flags right now with this company. The Freebird Von Erichs feud it's hot for the Dallas crowd, but it is kind of boring now. We've seen it. We've seen all the matches, and where do you really go from there? Where do we go from there? That's a good question. How about we call it quits and wrap up the show? So, we'll be back on Monday. We have the Retro Raw, the SmackDown, and the Collision show to review. There are no upcoming events that I am aware of for the time being. WWE will have another premium live special coming up soon. Actually, I think it's SummerSlam, right? Yeah, when is SummerSlam? Check the wiki page. It is on August 5th. It's coming up, but we still got some time. A few more weeks. So, yeah. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. I'll catch you guys on Monday. And take care. Peace out.